Hey everyone, Wazoo here, and I thought this would be a good time to talk about Visual Studio Code. Maybe you're new to web development, or maybe you've kind of been using the same editor for a very long time. As you start getting into more web development work, and also like a lot of searching a lot of tutorials around YouTube, you'll notice that a lot of tutorial authors tend to use Visual Studio Code. So I thought I would go through a video here on just some tips and tricks on setting up Visual Studio Code to kind of get it looking maybe the way you want. Maybe you haven't been able to find the right settings to adjust and you're kind of left wondering how you do it. So let's maybe take this video and take some time to go through that. Yeah. So here I am at code.visualstudio.com. Now I'm recording this on a Windows computer, as you can probably tell. It's because the nice big shiny download for Windows button is right there in front of us. So it has other builds for other operating systems. We've got Mac OS, we've got Linux. So just hit the button here and download the version for the platform that you're using. And this is free of charge. You don't have to register anything. You don't have to sign into anything to register for it. This is completely free. And then let's go through some settings. Okay, so here we are on a bit of Java code. I thought I would open up an existing project that we've gone through in some of my earlier videos on building a to-do application with Spring Boot 3. And you'll see here that we've got a funky highlighting and annotating going on thanks to Visual Studio Code here. Maybe I'll just make this a little bit bigger. There we go. And so let's reset that to the project view. And so yeah, so we've got a simple Java file here, and so we get some different syntax highlighting depending on if it's a function, or if it's an annotation, or if we're returning something from an existing function code here. So we've got just some test JavaScript snippets here. And then I'll open up some HTML, and this is what it looks like. So it's helpfully colored, that way you can tell where elements are beginning and ending, and what are properties, HTML properties, and what are not. Let's see, we can go through the Docker file, and this is how it highlights and shows our text in the Docker file. Okay, great. Of course, when you first start up Visual Studio Code, it doesn't look like this. It looks pretty plain and simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset all of my settings, and we're going to go through these step by step and get some settings in place. So on Windows, if you hit Control, comma, you get the settings dialog coming up. I think on Mac it's Command, comma. It must be something similar to that. And the easiest way to find your way around the settings is through the search bar at the top. It really helps. It makes it a whole lot faster to filter down a list of the settings you want to look at. And so what you can also do is all of the settings for user and workspace are stored in JSON files. So over here on the right, we've got a little icon there, Open Settings in JSON. So this is what the user settings look like in JSON. And I'll go back to the user settings here. I'll close some of these up. And for the workspace, I'll open up the JSON settings for that. Okay, so you can see that I've got some settings set up. And you might be wondering, first of all, what is the difference here between user and workspace? So the user settings, when you've got the user highlighted here, these settings are global. So for every instance of Visual Studio Code that you'll have running on your machine, they'll be using the same user settings. When you make a change to the workspace settings, then these are just for this particular project that you're in, this particular folder. So if you are routinely switching between different projects, different folders, then it is common that you would have different settings depending on the project type that you're using. Maybe on one project it's for say a Ruby on Rails project, and then on another folder it's a Java with some HTML and JavaScript, CSS, that kind of thing. So, or you can just have your settings globally stored in user, and then it applies to all of your projects that you're opening up. So one advantage of Workspace is that you can create a, let's say you're working on a team, and what you can do is create a Workspace settings configuration that you can then keep in source control. So you can put that in your project's GitHub or GitLab, wherever your source control is for your team's project. And then that way, anyone opening the project in Visual Studio Code will have the same Visual Studio Code settings across the team. So it'll look the same, it'll be consistent, and everyone will have the same syntax highlighting, which makes it easier to help other teammates. So if they're running into issues, and you share a screen and you pair on something, if everything looks the same, then it can remove some of that noise of figuring out if it's sort of an editor in your way or if it's just the actual code that you're trying to look at. So that's the difference between user and workspace. So for the settings that we'll adjust in this video right here, I'm going to keep everything in the user mode, just for ease of use. So let's go ahead and in the settings JSON, this is the workspace settings. I'm gonna delete it, and I'll also go through extensions. Maybe what I'll do is I'll get rid of all my extensions as well, so that we're starting from scratch, and I'm starting from the same point that you are if you've just downloaded Visual Studio Code. I've removed all of my extensions in my version of Visual Studio Code, as you'll be able to tell over here in the extensions tab of the editor. We've got installed a count of 0. So I'm going to leave those alone. This pop-up might come up because we've got some Java code opened. Let's just X out of it for now, and we'll get to it later. So these settings, we'll just leave it alone. This is from the workspace. This is the settings that we've got that I've got locally. I'm going to delete all these, and to reset all of my settings. Okay, so now I've reset all of my settings. Look how tiny the screen is now. So first, let's talk about theme. First, I like to get a theme installed, and that helps things look a whole lot better. It helps with syntax highlighting and coloring, and just making things stand out and identifiable when you're looking through your source code. So in your extensions over here, use this search box in the marketplace for Cobalt2. And you'll see this theme here, Cobalt2 theme official from Wes Bos. So go ahead and hit the install button on that. And then I just set the Cobalt theme. That's the theme that I'm choosing. So right away, it's applied right away. And what you'll start to notice as you play with these settings is that because Visual Studio Code is written in itself, it's written with JavaScript, HTML, and bundled within a package called Electron, which is basically a browser, like a portable browser that you can build applications for. Then any changes we make will be reflected right away. So you'll see the changes, you'll see everything show up right away as you set them in these settings or in any extensions you pick up. So we'll do more extensions later, but let's go back to the settings. And okay, so we've got this right here. So first, the first thing I always do is this one here called Autosave. So right now, if we make any changes to our code, I'll just hit some space there. You'll see that we've got a little dot showing up here in the tab, signifying that there's changes to this file that aren't yet saved. And when you're working with a lot of files, a large project, and maybe you have things running in the background, like say a dev server, like if you're using Node or something JavaScripty, and you've got a server running behind the scenes that just hot reloads every time you update code, then it gets a little bit, I don't want to say annoying, but yeah, I guess it gets a little bit annoying as you make changes to remember to hit Control S every single time that you want to save something in order for the changes to be picked up by your locally running server. So what I like to do is have the editor do that for me. I don't want to worry about saving it all. So the first setting I always pick is we've got either you turn off auto saving, so you're manually saving the file, or we've got an after delay. So let's say after a period of time, you can set it to any kind of delay that you want. So let's say after a few seconds it'll auto save, which I'm not really a huge fan of. On focus change, which is when you select a different tab or a different application, then the file will save itself. Or on actual window changes. So when you change the actual focus of your window, so let's say you switch to an entirely different app. You're not just looking at a different tab of Visual Studio Code, you switch to a different app. Then that'll trigger the window change, which then you can use to save your file. So my preference is on focus change. That seems to be sort of the happy medium for me, making sure that things are saved as I'm working, plus in a consistent sort of manner as I'm flipping around. So the next setting I want to talk about is the font size. So you'll notice here that we've got some code right here. So here's what the default font size looks like. I'm not going to blow this up for the YouTube video. That way I can demonstrate the changes we're making here. So this font size controls the font size of the editor. So let's say I make this 26. Actually, I'll make it 28. So if we go back to this, you'll see how much larger the text is now. And it hasn't impacted our project view here at all, just our code editor window. So I usually like to keep that around 26 to 28. I bump it up a little more when I'm recording, and I'll show you how that happens shortly. So the next setting I usually adjust is the tab size. So tab size is how many spaces a tab will get you. So this helps for things like indenting your code. Right now, like I'm tabbing across, and these tabs are by default set to 4 spaces. It makes it, even though it makes it things really spread out and easier to read, it kind of gets difficult to read, I find, when you're working on a large project and the code that you're looking at is quite heavy in every source file. So I usually try to keep it around 2. And then another one that we can adjust is the files exclusion window, or settings here, not window. So this is some settings that you can adjust to exclude files from showing up on the project view on the left here. So right now we've got a bunch of defaults. So star.git, svn, hg, which is another source control program, CVS, which is for CVS, dsstore, which is usually on Mac. For just about every folder that gets created, it generates a dsstore file, and a thumbsdb for Windows. So we can add a pattern of our own, and you'll see on the left things update as you exclude files. So for an example, let's add a pattern of star.md files. So all marked down. We don't want to see them in this editor view anymore. So let's hit OK. And you'll see right away that the readme.md is gone. I think that was the only MD file there was. So let's remove that, and it pops up again back down here. So you can use this setting to hide things that you don't want to see. So maybe, for example, you don't want to see the idea files. So *//.idea. And then also the Maven folder, so *//.mvn, and hit OK. And then we've got these here, which filter out those from our project view there. So it makes it easier to find other things, and they also are excluded from any searching that you might want to do when you open up the search tab and you want to search through if you're looking for particular text or a function name, things like that, then it be those files that you put in the exclude list will also be excluded from the search. Okay, so for now I'll restore these settings. So the next funky one to update is the title, which is this space up here. So up here in the search box, let's type in title. And we get this section here, window title. Part right here is what Visual Studio Code is referring to as the title. So we can control what that looks like. So right here we've got dirty. So an indicator for when the active editor has unsaved changes. So let's go ahead and make some changes here. And you'll see that the dirty indicator shows up right away on the title bar. Oh, and it just auto-saved for us, so now it disappeared. Then the next one we have is the active editor short, which is the name of the folder the file is contained in, so the actual folder name. And then we've got a separator, so this dash character is the separator. Let's see, where are we? Yep, this dash is the separator. And then we've got the root name here, which is the name of the opened workspace or folder. So this Spring Boot 3 to do applications. So this can come in really handy when you have multiple Visual Studio Code windows open. And if you're toggling between them, you don't want to lose track of which project you're in or what you're updating. And then we have another separator, which is this. And then we've got the app name. Let's expand that out. Okay, so app name, which is the name of the product, Visual Studio Code. Okay, so let's take out the app name. We know we're in Visual Studio Code. We'll keep that separator. And we'll keep that root name because I think that's important. If you're flipping between a lot of different projects, you don't want to lose track of where you are. Okay, and then we'll keep this separator here. And then instead of active editor short, I usually like to I usually like to see full path of the file. So let's change that to active editor long. Okay, active editor long, and I still like the dirty indicator in front of everything else. But I think what I'll do is I'll put a separator in between the dirty indicator and the active editor long. Okay, so now we've got things updated. We've got the full path of the file. Okay, which again, it helps if you're using multiple projects and you want to make sure that you're editing the file that you think you're editing. As we update our file, the dirty indicator shows up here still on the front. So play around with the setting. Set it to use whatever settings here that you want to adjust what shows up in your title bar. These are just my suggestions on what works for me, but I think it's a really good starting point. So another setting that was really driving me nuts in some of my earlier videos was when you would hover over a annotation, a giant blob of documentation would show up on whatever it is you're hovering over. So right now I've got hovering off, and I'll show you where that is, and I'll show you we'll toggle that on and off. So if we type in hover in the search bar, so we've got hover enabled. So right now hovering is enabled. Oh, okay. So nothing is showing up when we hover over anything. Nothing is showing up because we don't have any of the extensions installed. So once we get those extensions installed, I'll go back into the hover settings and show you what I mean. For now, let's turn off hovering to make sure that we're finishing up all of the settings that I wanted to go through. So I usually turn off hovering, make that disabled. The next one I usually go through is window reuse. So sometimes that drives me nuts. So window reuse is the idea that when you're in a file and then you want to edit a different file, you click on one in your project view, and it'll sometimes open it in the same window that you were in, which is not what I want. Like there's times where I want to compare between two different files, or maybe I want to make changes in one file and then come back to a different one to update something that corresponds to the this other module that I was working in. You get the idea. So I don't always want the current window, the current editor window that I'm working in to change between the different files. I want it to open in new tabs across the top here. So under settings, if you search for reuse, it would help if I spelled that right. Reuse. Okay. So we've got some different reuse settings here. So we've got this setting here, open files in new window. Controls whether files should open in a new window when using a command line or file dialog. Note that there can still be cases where the setting is ignored. So I usually switch this to on. Then the next one I usually touch is this preview one. Workbench editor enable preview. Controls whether open editors show as preview editors. Preview editors do not stay open, are reused until explicitly set to be kept open via double click or editing, and show file names in italics. So I usually switch this off because anytime I click on a file, I just want it to open. I just want it to open in a tab on the right. The preview mode is when it'll open in a window and it'll keep reusing that same window if you're maybe flipping between different ones because you're not sure of which file you were looking for. Telemetry means different things to different people, of course. Let's first search for it. Telemetry. Okay, so let's read through what telemetry states here in Visual Studio Code. Controls Visual Studio Code telemetry, first-party extension telemetry, and participating third-party extension telemetry. Some third-party extensions might not respect this setting. Consult the specific extension's documentation to be sure. Telemetry helps us better understand how Visual Studio Code is performing, where improvements need to be made, and how features are being used. Read more about the data we collect and our privacy statement. A full restart of the application is necessary for crash reporting changes to take effect. So by default, Visual Studio Code sends all of these things that are checked, so crashes and usage data and error functions, error telemetry, back to Microsoft servers. So if you ask a developer what telemetry means that, as stated in this blob of text here, that usually it's things that are built into your application to help you help the customer. So if you've got your own software product and someone has downloaded and is using it, you don't get, by default, you normally don't get any visibility into what they're doing, how they're using the application in their environment. So if your application crashes a lot in their environment, or things don't work right as you want them to help the customer, then you don't have any idea of what's going on. So depending on the user's comfort level, telemetry is either a good thing or a bad thing. So in this case, I figure that so many people are sending things back to Microsoft that they're getting enough info about what is and isn't working in Visual Studio Code that my little instance is not going to make a difference. But it's important that I'm not oversharing what I'm sending back to Microsoft servers either. So I always like to come in here and just turn this off. Note, if the setting is off, no telemetry will be sent regardless of other telemetry settings. If this setting is set to anything except off and telemetry is disabled with deprecated settings, no telemetry will be sent. So like I say, I usually just turn this off. So another one to update if you want is the keyboard settings. So if you go to the bottom left corner, there's a manage widget down here. And if you click that, it comes up with another menu, and you can look at the keyboard shortcuts. And so this is a list of all of the keyboard shortcuts that are in Visual Studio Code. There is a lot of them. And it shows you how customizable and how interactable, for lack of a better word, that Visual Studio Code is. So it's got a key binding for just about everything. If you're coming from other editors, let's say IntelliJ, then it's possible to also import a IntelliJ keybinder extension, which will replace your default key bindings with the same ones that match as best as possible to IntelliJ. So if you're really if you've got a lot of muscle memory on using IntelliJ, keyboard settings, then you can find an extension to do the same thing in Visual Studio Code. And there's also vice versa. If you go over into IntelliJ and you look at the plugins, there's a plugin for Visual Studio Code keyboard settings. So you can do the same thing in each. So I'm just highlighting this here so that if you're unsure of what keyboard setting will do what, or if you want to update something, you just hate the way that new files are opened, etc., or the way that you can search for a new file, then this is where you can update it. So let's go into extensions. So in our nav menu on the far left here, let's look at extensions. And so right now we only have the Cobalt theme installed, which is this coloring that we went through earlier. So another one that we're going to look at for Java is called the extension pack for Java. And it is made by Microsoft, so it should be the first one on the list. So it's popular extensions for Java development that provide Java IntelliSense, debugging, testing, Maven or Gradle support, project management, and more. So if you look through this list here, these are sort of the sub extensions that get installed along with as part of this extension. So it's kind of like a bundle. So we've got IntelliCode, which is AI assisted development, language support for Java by Red Hat. We've got a debugger for Java support for Microsoft, Maven for Java, and we've got a test runner for Java and project manager for Java. So go ahead and install, which will then install all of these. And it might make you reload to make sure everything is picked up. Okay, no, everything looks okay. So let's get out of that. And okay, so we see that all of these sub extensions are now installed. Back to our extensions. So let's search for the next one we want to get is Docker. That's usually an important one. And let's again install the one from Microsoft. So if you've got Docker running on your system, or if you've got it installed, or if you're using a project that has any Docker containers, which is quite a few of them these days, I won't say majority, but there's quite a few, then this is a really great extension to have. You'll see on the left navbar here, it creates a Docker file, a Docker icon that when you click on it, it'll then switch to a view that lets you manage any containers or images, networks, volumes, etc. In the project that you're working on. So it can be really handy when you're using Docker to make use of this extension. So another extension that I always install, especially for Java Spring, is Lombok. So it's a Lombok annotation supporter for VS Code. So again, let's enable hovering and let's go back to our Java file. And now when we hover over an annotation, we get more documentation on what the annotation is for and what let's get a different one. What it's meant to do, and basically a link to some of the help text that's in the jar file itself for that annotation, that specific annotation. So it can come in handy. Like I say, I wish there was a setting for just annotations, but leaving the rest of the hovering off, for example, while you're just learning. So let's disable that hovering again. And then finally, since we're in Spring Boot, one of the extensions that I always install is the Spring Boot extension pack. So this is from Pivotal Labs. So if you install this, it comes with 3 sub extensions. So the Spring Initializer support, the Spring Boot tools, and the Spring Boot dashboard. So again, on the left, after we've installed this extension pack, we can click on the dashboard icon, menu icon, and our apps are now showing up in the left here that we can run or debug. We can see a list of beans that are in our application, as well as maybe any endpoint mappings that we might have. So it's another really useful set of extensions for Visual Studio Code. So if we go back into our view here, so we'll see how many we have installed. So this is all we have installed as our extensions for Visual Studio Code. And there's literally, I don't want to say hundreds, but there are quite a lot extensions available in the marketplace. So we've only kind of really, I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface of the available extensions here. There's an infinite amount more depending on the type of project that you're working on. I find that these are the few best ones to make sure to install right away. And then when you get going into different kind of projects, different languages, different frameworks, then you might come across extensions that really help you with those frameworks or languages. And the last one that we'll talk about here is zooming. So if we go back to our settings, we can search for zoom. And this adjusts the zoom level of the entire window itself. So the font size, remember the font size adjusted just the size of the text in the actual editor, but everything else kind of remained the same. It remained the same small text that you see here on my pane. But for the zoom level, we can set this, which will affect the entire application. So let's set it to 5. And now you'll see, boom, that it's really zoomed in everything for our editor screen. And we can use, since this is a browser, Visual Studio Code recognizes the same zooming control features, or key bindings, not features, the zoom control key bindings that you have for your browser. So Control minus and Control plus can be used right here, adjust the zoom level, as well as increase the zoom. So let's leave this as a default of 1. Again, you can leave it at 0 if you want. If you're working on your own machine and you don't need to share your screen, or you're not recording any videos yourself, then 0 or 1 is probably sufficient for what you want to do. So that's about it for this video. That was a preliminary scratching the surface type of introduction to using Visual Studio Code. I think for a lot more of my videos, I'll be using this going forward, just to sort of show off how extensible it is, and it might be easier to navigate some of the files that I'll have to work on that it was usually kind of difficult to show up properly in IntelliJ for recording on video. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and if you didn't like what you saw, then I really want to thank you for watching this far. Have a great day wherever you are, and we'll see you later, everyone. Peace.